I don't hear you now, so I don't know what's going on. Ah, okay. Do you have a link and I can see?
And hello everybody, my name is Zalterview. Welcome to the stream. I hope you all enjoy. And with me is Scientist Mel. Say hello.
Hello? I didn't hear anything that you said. No. I don't hear anything now if you're talking. Okay, that's weird. I'm holding it down and I'm pushing the button and I'm talking. I don't know. Okay, I'm trying this. I'm getting activity on my end. I'm getting activity on my end when I use voice recognition, but yeah, I guess you don't hear anything. I can hear you. I am pushing to talk and it's not working. I left and came back in. I don't know if that helped. I'm pushing and I'm talking and it's not working.
So what are we doing today? Defect is on 7. Normal enemies are indeed tougher, but we still need to do the iron.
Your headphones? Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello? Yes? Good. Huh.
First question is, what do you think about? Actually, introduce yourself, just in case that I didn't capture that.
Okay. Well, I am Scientist Mel on Twitter. I'm also Scientist Mel on Facebook. I have a YouTube channel. I also stream on Periscope. I do stream on Twitch, on live streaming on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Central. All of my shows are live. Well, I am doing some new series where I'm pre-recording it, but most of my shows are live stream. And for my Saturday show, it's all viewer chosen topics. So my viewers pick what it is that I talk about, and so I put that together, and we have a talk about science. But I do lots of different things. I'm a science communicator. I've done research. I've also been an educator. So pretty cool, all about the sciencey stuff. So I quite like it.
Science is indeed very fun to learn. First question is, what do you think about the paywall to get to certain studies or what have you?
Well, there's an easy way to get around the paywall, and I don't think it's something that people actively know about. Um, you can, if you know who the authors are and they're at a university, you can usually just email them. Their university emails are pretty public knowledge. You can go Google them on whatever, whatever university they go to. Send them a direct email and they'll send you the paper for free. So it's not, it is something that you can get around. It's actually pretty crappy that there is a giant paywalls in some cases. But if you are a university student, most of the time you can get around that with access to digital libraries at your university. But if you're a person who doesn't have access to a university library, you can easily just email one of the authors and they'll send it to you. People love to share their research.
Interesting, interesting. All right, so, what kind is you're a scientist, are you? You're right, yes. So, what field have you studied?
Well, the fields that I've studied in, I did some undergraduate work in cancer drug delivery systems through nanoparticle technology. I also did undergraduate research in genetics on the Tree of Life project, trying to map the genome of the ladybug. I've also done work as a graduate student. I actually have a publication on a breast cancer test that I helped to engineer. I worked in 3D printer technology as well as nanoparticles that were conjugated with antibodies to be able to detect exosomes. Those are tiny little packages that are released by cancer cells that contain proteins that can cause other cells to become cancerous. So that was part of some graduate studies that I did, and later on, I worked in industry with protein recombination in order to generate antigens that were used all over the world for tests.
Very interesting indeed. Now this is a topic near and dear to my heart. Do you play video games or any type of game at all?
I have played lots and lots of video games. The last one that I was playing most recently, I think, is the latest Tomb Raider. I was playing that for a little bit. I picked it up. I buy used games because I just have a really hard time shelling out lots of bucks for a brand new one when you can get a used one, just like a month later. I actually own an original Atari console. I own a Commodore 64. I have I think I don't have every video gaming system right now, like it's consecutively. I used to have an old NES, but I still have an original PlayStation that was chipped so it can play bootleg games, which is kind of fun. And I do have a Xbox and a PS4, Xbox One and a PS4, and I do play games. I think one of the games that I got into BioShock Infinite, and I love fighter games. Like Injustice was a lot of fun, but I did go off on the creators on Twitter about some of the aspects of that game. But Batgirl, I like playing her on Injustice. That's pretty cool.
Well, I'm a PC gamer myself, so I enjoy, um, let's see, games on my Steam list are Divinity Original Sin, Crusader Kings 2, Monkey Island games, Owlboy, Path of Exile, all the old Star Wars games, and Witcher. Have you played any of those games, or have you played on PC?
I have played on PC before, um, but it wasn't any of those particular games. I tried to do like it was kind of like World of Warcraft, except it was with pirates and Pirates of the Caribbean. I tried to play that for a while because there was a free version, but the free version, it was just kind of, you couldn't really get a decent boat. You had to fork over more cash. I'm like, you just cannot. I don't know. I did play the crap out of Sims for a while, and I liked Sim City. That was a lot of fun. Um, I liked building type of civilization type of games, stuff like that. I haven't. I used to play Counter Strike. I used to play Counter Strike and Doom. I played Doom for a while. Um, so yeah, that was pretty fun. Counter Strike, Doom, but that was usually on when this is before we had a lot of fast internet, so we would just link up our computers to each other and sit there and just play that way with one another, which is kind of cool.
Uh, yes. Counter Strike is meh, but I've never played the old Dooms, so I can't say anything about that. But yes, I think you would enjoy Frostpunk or other games like that, or even just City Skylines, which is better than the old SimCities games, or even Frostpunk, for example. Um, what do you, what are your thoughts on cyberpunk-esque games?
I haven't really played them. I mean, I'm familiar with cyberpunk type of style. I've played tabletop. Oh God, was it Shadowrun tabletop? D&D style stuff where it was like cyberpunk stuff. But I haven't played that like a video game platform. That's where I'm probably more of a nerd when it comes to the cyberpunk stuff is tabletop RPGs.
What is your favorite tabletop game to play?
Well, I used to play a whole lot of D&D. It's edition 3.5 edition, I believe. And I did play Vampire for a while. That was a lot of fun. I like to I thought it was kind of neat. It's pretty interesting with the gosh, I think it was Underworld when that movie came out. White Wolf, the creators of the vampire game, I think they tried to sue Underworld because they were following similar clans to their particular game. So that was that was scandalous. But I would usually play stuff like that: D&D, Vampire, Shadowrun, those sorts of things. I enjoyed it.
So, uh, I'm sorry. I usually be more awake, but after working 8 hours and being slightly sick, I don't feel as awake as I should be for this. So my apologies in advance, or well, whatever, what have you. Um, is um, damn. What is you? Is there any scientific breakthrough that you've been paying attention to recently?
Okay, any particular scientific breakthrough? Well, one of the things that I think is absolutely fascinating, and there's a research hospital nearby that about 6 months ago was just approved for human trials, where essentially they are rewiring people's immune systems to fight their cancer, which is amazing. So essentially, they take T cells out, and those are part of your immune system, and those are the cells that usually handle. We okay. Let me just explain. We all get cells that forget to do their job. That's essentially like the beginning of cancer, where essentially like your lung cell no longer functions as a lung cell. It just keeps eating food and keeps spreading and dividing, but it's not doing its job. That's kind of what cancer is. Now your T cells normally take out those particular cells, those bad cells. But sometimes those bad cells can trick your T cells into thinking that they're okay. Um, so what they do is they take those T cells, take a sample, take them out, and reprogram them to actually attack your cancer. So it's freaking amazing that we're reaching that level of treatment to where we're able to program and utilize the body's resources to go and actually, do what it's supposed to do and handle diseases.
Yes, very, very interesting. Very interesting. What do you think? Did you hear about the CRISPR thing in China, where apparently a doctor had changed the DNA of a baby? What do you think about that?
I haven't heard about where the doctor changed the DNA of a baby. Was the doctor altering a disease gene?
I don't know. Because New York Science of New York Times, or the Scientific New York Times, kind of fails in providing any information in their little Twitter blurbs. I didn't know what they meant by that, so I don't know.
That's one issue that I have, especially with the news outlets and media. There are people who report science but do it very poorly. They don't talk about what actually is going on with the science. They don't explain it, and sometimes they present it falsely. For instance, if you drink a couple glasses of wine, that's the same as working out in the gym. That's not what the paper says at all, but that's what the headlines say. They're very clickbaity and it's incorrect information. And sometimes the New York Times is guilty of that. So, in regard to CRISPR, we are moving along quite a bit with that. There's still some problems associated with CRISPR, and I think there's a lot of things that China can get away with that the U.S. can't because of ethical laws and that are held that the United States holds itself to and holds scientists to. And so I'm not certain. I have to have a look, but CRISPR is an emerging technology that's moving rapidly towards getting to a point to where we should be able to alter disease genes pretty pretty easily. We just have to be careful and make certain that there's no alternate repercussions or any kind of bad side effects because one gene doesn't usually control one thing. So if you go altering some of these genes, you have to make certain that that particular gene doesn't mess up everything else.
Well, speaking of changing people's genes, that segues into a new question. How easy is it to change people's overall DNA? Or do you have to change it by different cell, or do you change? Or is there like a central zone that you could change that overall changes the body, or how does that work? You're the scientist here.
All right, so when you're dealing with altering somebody's genetic code, yes, it's going to be pretty important. Delivery. How are you going to get that particular? And this requires a little bit of background information on how cells work. Your DNA is held within your nucleus. There are ways to get DNA into the nucleus, but that's through carrier proteins. And so you also have to be careful because you got to ensure that the DNA, it shouldn't degrade inside the cell once it gets there. It shouldn't. DNA is pretty stable. It's much more stable than, for instance, RNA. But if you're looking to alter cells, a lot of it's going to depend on dosage. And my understanding is what they use for like this Cas9, that's essentially associated with CRISPR. The enzymes that they use to alter the genetic code, there are potential issues with that because sometimes they might change a gene that looks similar to the one that you want to change, and it's not the same gene. So there's a little bit there's a bit of concern with error, and also the dosage amount that you would have to put inside a human would be so much more than, for instance, a mouse. And there are some concerns about what would that amount of that enzyme do in the body? How does it break down? Is it going to keep going? Is it going to alter cells that you don't want it to alter? So those are the types of things. And when I last looked up about CRISPR, which about 8 months ago, 8 or 9 months ago, I did an episode on how CRISPR works. There were still a lot of concerns about how much dosage would require to alter the genes in a person, and what are the long-term effects of that. Will that enzyme degrade over time? And if it does degrade over time, what are the byproducts and how's that going to affect a person? Are they toxic? Those are the things that need to be addressed.
Yes, well, my original question was how easy or hard it was to change the DNA, and you didn't really answer that question.
It's very hard. There you go. It's very hard. It's not something that's easy because of the fact that there's a high chance of error that you're going to change the wrong gene. So it's quite difficult, and they need to modify the technology a bit more to make certain that these potential other side effects don't cause any problems.
Yes, there will. Then there obviously won't be potato Slav clones coming around for a long ass time. Jokes aside, anyway, what do you think about the Vasimir technology, or even just um, that warp technology that they um, they they put out there? What do you think about those two?
As far as warp technology, the only thing that I know about that are warp bubbles. They're trying to essentially make these little warp bubbles because warp speed is something that's not not something we can completely overcome, because of the fact we can't get faster than the speed of light. And if we were able to move like a ship to be faster than the speed of light, there's so much mass there, it would require an enormous amount of energy that's just not feasible, and I do not think is even possible. But there's something they're working on with warp bubbles where they put bubbles in the front and it kind of shortens space a little bit. Rather than trying to shorten a massive amount of space, if you have teeny tiny little bubbles there, they're much smaller. If you're able to shorten little bits of space, that seems a bit more plausible, and that would accelerate a ship forward, potentially, hypothetically speaking. But that's all I know about what they're trying to do with warp speed is in the form of warp bubbles.
I believe that's called the Albuquerque Drive. What about the ion engine for spaceships, or the Vasimir engine?
I don't have a lot of information on that. I've heard of it, but I don't have any active information that I can help contribute with any kind of understanding. Perhaps I can add that to my list of potential topics, and then I can dig down and break it down.
Yes, that would be quite interesting, a topic for you to talk about on your channel. That'd be that should be a thing, indeed. Yes. So, God damn it, Zalrock, why are you pausing on questions now? Damn it. All right. So, there's one thing. Let's see. So, have you ever is there any what is the most controversial science topic you've ever covered?
Okay, let me think. The most controversial science topic. Well, I mean, I suppose that depends entirely on the perspective of who I'm talking to. Some think climate change is controversial. I've done talks on that on my channel. Sex, like genetic sex versus gender. Um, I've talked about that, which can be controversial. I've talked about statistics involving guns, which is quite controversial for some. Um, I've talked about depression and suicide. I've talked about internet predators. I've talked about oh gosh, I've talked about quite a few things. I haven't dove into like abortion and stuff like that yet. But sometimes the show episodes that I do kind of walk a line a little bit on politics. I have talked about the current problems with scientific literacy, and how the United States is getting dumber when it comes to science. We're getting worse. We're not getting better. We're getting worse. And so, I guess it depends entirely on who you talk to, on what would be considered controversial. So I don't know. I've written pieces. Now my website, scientistmel.com, I've written articles about controversial topics. I've talked about the perspective of freedom of speech from a science standpoint and how important it is. I've also talked about giving flat earthers a platform. Now, I did do an episode on the science of flat earthers, not that there's any science associated with what they do, but why they think the way that they do. I've done an episode on influence, where I've talked about the Stanford prison experiment, the Milgram experiment, and how it is that people influence each other. That was, and Stanford experiment was a very, very controversial experiment it actually spawned the American Psychological Association to have more um, rigorous rules in place to protect people from being damaged by any type of psychological type of experiment. So I guess it just kind of runs the gamut. All of my viewers pick my topics, and so I just find all of the relevant statistics, good resources, reputable resources, and put a show together.
And the show is very interesting to watch when I have time or when it's not when I'm actually at home able to watch it, because I have to work sometimes when you're doing your live streams, or I'm doing something else, or I'm streaming or something else entirely. So sometimes I have to miss them, or other times I have to watch them later on the VOD. So they're all very good. So I'd say
Well, thanks.
5 out of 5.
That's very cool. Thanks.
You are indeed welcome. So, um, were the I don't really know anything about the Stanford experiment. Is it does it show like Stockholm syndrome or something? Because it sounds like that to me, but I could be wrong. I'm not knowledgeable about things that I don't know. So
Okay, the Stanford prison experiment was was essentially performed at Stanford University. They'd taken the psychology building and took the basement and made it to look like a prison. And so they went and took undergraduates, young males, and interviewed them to find people who had no prior mental illness, no use of drugs, nothing that could affect them. And they looked for any previous sadistic tendencies. And what they were trying to do was show whether the prison itself, if because there was a lot of violence from officers, like workers in the prison, on the inmates, and so there was a lot of abuse and violence from the guards hurting inmates and such. And so they were trying to figure out, is it the environment where it's this power, this power, powerful guards and the weaker inmates, that they were trying to see if it's like the actual power setup of the prison environment, or if the guards are actually sadistic and the criminals are just constantly wanting to break the rules. And so they wanted to see if it was environment or if it was the person. So they took these people with no prior mental illness, no prior sadistic behaviors or symptoms, and they divided them up. They took, okay, one group was going to be the guards and one group were going to be the prisoners. And so they started the experiment. It was supposed to run 2 weeks. It lasted, I believe, for less than a week because people were losing their minds in the prison. The inmates fell quickly into their roles. The guards jumped quickly into their roles, and abuse was starting by like the second or third day. And so they had regular like 8-hour shifts. They came in, and they would come through. There was a schedule for the inmates to follow, and the guards were just verbally abusive. There are some reports that they had hit them and things like that. And these were men who had no drug abuse history, no prior behaviors that would be sadistic. But what they found was that the power setup of the prison, the nicest person will actually fall into line and take on the role, because it's they have preconceived notions of how guards are supposed to treat inmates. they will absolutely rise to the challenge and be horrible human beings based on the power structure and the role setup. So it's not, so is it the person or is it the environment? And so they had to call it off after about, it was like 4 or 5 days. Somebody left. One person they just dismissed because he was completely losing it, and he was convinced that it was real. That was absolutely real, and this was no longer a psychological experience. All the inmates started to believe they were really in jail. So it was a real big problem because damage was being done to them mentally and physically.
But did they answer the question of does this was it the person or the environment? Or was it both?
Probably a little bit of both, but it's mostly the environment. The people after it was over, and people met with counselors and that sort of thing, they were horrified. The guards were horrified by their behavior. They're like, I never would have thought I would have been that kind of person. Um, and a lot of those types of experiments came about from, if you're not familiar with the Milgram experiment, Milgram came out, he was curious by the World War II war crime trials, where you had officers who were gassing Jewish people and people who hid them and just torturing human beings. And they kept saying, well, I was just following orders. I was just following orders. Um, so it's pretty interesting. People will do horrible things to other people if they can pass the buck of blame. And that's what the Milgram experiment kind of pointed out. So there might be a little bit of that going on with the Stanford prison experiment because of the fact you have these men that are told that, okay, this is a psychological experiment. You're going to be the guards and we want you to, this is, what their schedule is. And then they just waited to see what happened. So the uniform played a role. The setup of the building played a role. And the Milgram experiment reinforces that as well. Um, Uniforms matter. The building matters on how people behave. So it is largely environment, but people will do horrible things if they aren't readily accounted for it. I mean, these guards probably thought, well, you know it, we're the professor or is gonna, the lead researcher is gonna be responsible, not me. So if there's a release of responsibility, people will then also, be willing to be a bit more brutal about it.
Nothing is more. Well, humans are scary. Even, yes, humans are the worst enemy of humans. We are the nightmare of us, of ourselves. Of course, some people don't like that truth, so obviously they don't listen, but unfortunately, give a person any kind of power and it will corrupt. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, you can actually watch the Milgram experiment on YouTube. It was based on where you had the electroshock setup, where you had people were, one was called the teacher and the other one was called the student, and the student had to answer questions, and if they got the answer wrong, you got a zap of electricity. So people, and you could hear the person screaming in the next room. The people didn't know that that was an actor and they weren't actually zapping them with electricity, but some people went up to like the lethal level of electric volts, and they kept saying, "This man sounds like he's hurt," and then the guy kept responding, and they kept going. But it's weird when they had a scientist in the room saying, and he would say the experiment must continue. Please continue. The experiment must continue. Um, the people that were administering the shocks felt like, well, I'm not going to be held accountable for this. The scientist person is. And so Milgram did a lot more experiments with that to kind of show that an authority figure matters. If there's somebody they can pass the buck to, that matters as well. And then you can also watch the Stanford Prison Experiment. Independent Film Channel did a movie about it, and it's really, really good. And it's a bit jarring if you haven't seen it. It's quite good.
Indeed, that does sound interesting. I'll probably watch that after the stream. So psychology is very weird. Do you, other than those two experiments, do you know anything else? Because I do know a Spanish psychologist, well, in training, but she tells me, well, she knows quite a bit of things.
I'm not certain what you asked me. Do I know more about psychology? My master's is in arts, but it's technically considered a bit of psychology because it's in science education. And so I did do educational research where I was trying to link content mastery, content interest. So I devised an experiment to see how I could generate interest in content and somehow mathematically link that to content mastery. So I do have an understanding of how people learn in the various ways that they can learn, and how to kind of to target all that. How do you engage people in actively learning something and listening about something? So I know a little bit about that. That was some research I did working on my first master's.
Yeah. Yes. So, the question, so that was interesting. I did. Well, what is the So, I remember on the Heathen Hour podcast where you were being interviewed by those guys that you had talked about harassment. What is the psychology? What causes people to harass others for apparently no reason?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why people might harass others. You have, I mean, they tend to walk a little bit along the lines of psychoses. So when I was harassed by a man that was narcissistic. He was a narcissist. He also exhibited sociopathic behaviors. And so when I cut off communication with him, he wanted to punish me. And so he started harassing me on social media. And that was a backlash. It was like an angry teenager type of response. Well, I'm going to get you back, you know. So there's that kind of harassment. There's the kind of harassment where people want you to shift your behavior or come back to them or do something they want to do as a means of control. That's usually what it's about, harassing somebody to kind of control them somehow. You also have, so I mean, you have harassment that can be blackmailing. In the UK, one form of harassment that will land you automatic jail time is revenge porn. And some men and there was a website in the US where men would go and post intimate pictures of their ex-girlfriends as a means to degrade them and shame them. And that website, the owner of that website is actually in jail right now. So there's lots of reasons why people engage in harassment, but in the UK, that type of harassment, revenge porn, will land you time in prison. It's treated very severely there, and it's starting to be taken more seriously here. But jealousy as a means of control, as a means to hurt another person, that I mean, kind of goes along those lines.
Indeed, and of course, obviously, not just men do that, women do that too, regardless of anyone's gender or sex or whatever. People
Yeah,
will be utter
true.
dicks to others.
That is true. It's just my experience has been men. Men have done that to me. There's not a lot that's happened with women in actively engaging in revenge porn and posting naked pictures of their ex-boyfriends or their ex-girlfriends on the internet. So, I mean, this is one of those things that tends to be seen more among men than women. So, if we're looking at statistics, I'm not saying it doesn't happen and it's not possible, but it's not very common.
Yes, so your experiences with men, and men do awful things a lot more than women, but women will often, as far as I've seen, I could be utterly wrong. I leave the whole ability to be wrong completely as my own responsibility here. There's women who kill their own children because their husband is going to divorce them or what have you, and that happens. And lesbians are more likely to be abusive than straight couples. I could be utterly wrong about that, but it's human beings are awful people when they want to be.
Yes, human beings are awful people when they want to be. I would be interested in where you've read such things, in what kind of statistics are involved with those. Women have killed their children. They and those people tend to be have some kind of mental illness of some kind. That's not all the time, but there is postpartum depression is a really horrible thing. Um, but usually there's other circumstances as well. It's not just that the husband is divorcing them. There's usually other factors at play too. One thing that's really interesting, statistically speaking, women go to prison more for crimes than men do. And there's actually in New York, you can look this up. There's an organization that raises a lot of awareness about the fact that women who have been abused and who are regularly abused by their spouses or their boyfriends, when they have fought back, when they have killed their abuser, they go to prison for that. Um, and so you got to kind of take into consideration. There's a lot of things that are going on. It's not so black and white. But there is an entire organization, I forget the name, in New York, where they've gone and they've done a lot of research, and the majority of women that are serving time in prison were abused by their spouses, and when they retaliated, they were thrown in jail for it. So, I mean, this is widely documented. So you got to kind of look at what the statistics say too, and think, okay, what other evidence is there, and what's really going on with this. So, but you can have a look and see what you find.
I will do so. Here's the thing. This is a very interesting thing about me. I don't just blindly believe something because someone says so. I like looking things up. I'm a little skeptical about claims, so I'll indeed look that up. I just I don't know. I just can't believe people when they say things, so I'll make sure to look that up.
Absolutely, I encourage everybody to go and check things out. I mean, it's just not everything is so cut and dry. There's a lot of factors that play into a particular event. One thing that I actually talked about on my show is chaos theory. Humans are perfect examples of chaos theory. The smallest changes in in a thing can lead to huge results. It's, they call it the butterfly effect. Butterfly flaps their wings, they're going to be a tornado in Texas. Everything is interlinked. You can link things together that can contribute to a particular event happening. Um, it is, and now that's not to say that that butterfly flaps his wings is going to instantaneously cause a tornado. It might take 20, 30, 40, 100 years. I don't know. There's no way to significantly prove that. But the point of all this is, if you look up on chaos theory, it's pretty neat. If you look it up, it's just essentially saying that anytime you have more than three variables working on a particular system, you have a very high chance for it to be a chaotic system. And the longer it goes with the variables working on it and the more variables involved, the less you can predict what's going to happen. You can't predict it in the long term. It's going to completely change. You can only predict in short term. That's why we can't predict weather so great. There's so many factors involved in how weather works that it changes. And so weather is a perfect example of chaos theory. There's so many variables. So when you're dealing with people, you got to kind of look in and see, okay, what are all the factors involved here? What's actually happening in this particular snapshot of this situation? Because over time, things can change, but when you're looking at it in this moment, in this particular situation, that's the only way you can study chaos theory is by looking at this one particular moment. Okay, now what's going to happen? Then you look at that and you analyze it individually.
Indeed, humans are very chaotic creatures. Even though we like being very orderly, our orator likes causing as much chaos as possible. That's the truth. And I also voted on that poll. Uh, I thought it would be a fun little video to learn about. So,
Yay!
all right. So we have 7 more minutes, so I can ask one more question or two, depending on how long the answer is. So, to boot off into chaos theory into another topic seems completely unordinary, but have you ever had any problems while gaming or like any harassment or anything playing Counter-Strike or Doom or what have you?
No, I didn't really have any harassment like that because at the time it wasn't linked to the web. It was just linked to my friends. And so my friends tend to not harass me. I don't really play games online with other people because I don't want to deal with all that. I have before, and people online can just be horrible jerks as it is. And I already experienced a lot of that anyway on Twitter and other forms of social media, um, and YouTube. I already get a bit of that as it is. So I just tend to not play other people online. And if I do play online with other people, it's people that I know that are my friends. That wouldn't be awful.
Yes, well, indeed, because um, there's the thing about anonymity, or however the fuck you say it. I don't know. I'm a horrible at English on occasion, even though I'm an English speaker. So give a ha, internet where you are basically behind a keyboard, then have some anonymous username where you don't have to get where you're not in front of another person. You could be an utter jackass to other people and not be responsible for it, and that's what happens. They don't feel other people online don't feel responsible for what they say or do because they're anonymous online, and they don't feel like they should be responsible. That's what happens. That's why people are assholes online.
It's interesting. I actually did an episode on the science of trolls, and I talked about the different types of trolls, the psychology behind it, and I referenced a study that was done where they found that people who were involved in very heavy trolling tended to be sadistic, Machiavellian, and narcissistic. And there was also some research done with Pew Research, PEW, where they talk about online harassment and how different people feel about it. What it and what do they think? And anonymity was one of the things that was brought up a lot. People who are anonymous feel like they get instant courage. They that anonymity empowers them to be awful to other people.
Indeed, I will admit that on occasion, in real life, I am that guy. I am that guy. On occasion, I am that guy. I can be that guy who will look at a person, or even just while talking to that person, be that guy. I am on occasion that guy. I am that awful person who makes that dark joke that you didn't want to hear, but made anyway. I am that guy. On occasion, I am that guy, and I apologize for being that guy, but I am that guy because because for like a D&D reference, I'm chaotic neutral. Sometimes I do things for my own benefit, regardless of other people's benefit. I am that person. That may make me sound like an asshole, but I admit I am an asshole. So there's that.
Oh goodness.
Well, it's better knowing that I'm an asshole and apologizing in advance for being one and being that guy. Okay? But online, I try talking to people civilly because I'm one of those people who thinks as long as pers and besides, I do things out of spite. If a person gives me unsolicited advice, like you should do X or you should not do X, I go, okay, I'll do X then. Thank you for your unsolicited advice. I'll make sure to do it now because I know it'll piss you off. I am that guy.
Okay.
Anyway, it's almost 7. Well, for you it's probably 8 or whatever. I don't know. Time zones are weird. So, thank you all very much for watching. This has been Scientist Mel with me, Zara Chaos, in the third Zalterview. And I admitted to something that I probably shouldn't have said, and people will probably be pissed off, but I don't care. So, say goodbye, Scientist Mel, or whatever.
Bye. Thank you for having me on the show. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, it was very fun indeed as well. So, thank you for coming on. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties.
That's okay. Well, I had a good time, and thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure having you on. So, have a good time, everybody. I'll see y'all next time in the next stream. See y'all tomorrow at the same time we started today. Goodbye.